My name is Mike Vaccaro. Welcome to my mouthpiece shop. And today, let's talk about the chromatic scale, its importance, and its use in music. It's really easier than you think. Everybody thinks it's kind of complicated, but it's really not. Once you understand it, you'll get it. But to understand it, of course, you have to practice it. And you have to practice it all the time. I've been practicing it for 50 years, maybe more, 60 maybe, I'm not sure. But practice is the essence of learning the scale, and it is the master scale of everything we play. All the other scales are created from it. Even atonal scales in music have a home with the chromatic scale. It started several hundred years ago, and I don't know why they call them half steps, but we'll get into that. And that's the confusing part, is they call them half steps when you go from note to note. It's probably the most important event in tonal music, because it gives you a basis that everything else is built on. The time to learn it is really as early as you can in your studies. And I know between rhythm and the chromatic scale and learning how to read music and learning how to just hold your instrument is a big job. So it's important that you do like the professional musicians do. We learn slowly and then gradually get faster. We learn slowly because once we have it in our fingers and we're not thinking about it anymore, we can go on to the things we have to think about. So if we master the chromatic scale, we can think more about our rhythm, our intonation, a lot of different things musicians have to think about. Maybe a simple little tune, Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's good, but if you know the chromatic scale, you can get through that stuff so much quicker, especially if you have any sense of rhythm. There are two things that are going to help you learn the chromatic scale. One is a keyboard, very important, a keyboard. You don't have to go out and buy a $500 keyboard or a $10,000 piano, or, I mean, they got keyboards out there for less than you pay probably for a private lesson. And all you need is a couple octaves. You actually only need one octave to see how it works. And it's a lot different for a piano player than for a woodwind player, because, or a violinist or whatever. As the piano, when it plays this way, first of all, the piano player can see what they're playing. So that helps. And the piano has the same fingerings, like from octave to octave, the fingerings are all the same, whereas on a clarinet or a bassoon or a trumpet or probably a cello or violin, we have different fingerings for each octave, so that makes it a little tougher too. But when you look at the keyboard, you can see the whole 12 or 13 notes, depending on whether you're counting the first note and the last note as extra notes. In other words, there's 12 changes of notes, but you repeat the first note as a 13th note. So I always like to get to the 13th note because it sounds like you're finishing the scale. But it is 12 changes of notes with the 13th note a repeat of the first note. Get a keyboard, and you can paste the name of the notes on the keys itself, and there's little kits that I may show you later that have it done for you, and they're color coded and it's really slick, and it costs $10, and it's really worth having that, even if you're playing looking at a plastic piano, just to see that C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, just to see that happen and see how it works is much easier than trying to assimilate it in your mind when you can't see it. So a keyboard is the number one most important thing you can do, and I've always suggested that you take a few keyboard lessons, whether you're going to be a keyboard major or not, because keyboard is the basic instrument of what we do, and it's good. The sadness of my life was I never got to play the piano very well. Being a woodwind doubler, I had to learn 4 instruments from the beginning. Very, very time consuming. So I'm going to use that as an excuse, but it's a very poor excuse. The piano would have helped me, and it'll help you. So even if you just have a plastic piano where you can see what it looks like, that's helpful, okay? The other thing that's going to help you a lot with the chromatic scale is test cards. You've seen test cards in other venues before. In music, on one side, there's going to be a picture of a note. Just a picture of a note in the staff. And on the other side of the playing card, there's going to be the fingering and the name of the note. So, you can make a little game out of it. How fast can you memorize the fingerings and the names of the notes based on what you see on the front side of the card? So those two things are really important to get going on the chromatic scale. And say each note as you play them. This is before you practice. C, listen to it, C sharp or D flat. C, C, C sharp, D, D, D flat, C. And you just keep going up the scale like that until you get used to the sound of the note, you get used to what it looks like, and you realize that each note you play is a half step. Even though we know that from one note to the next note seems like a step. You know, if you take a step and you put your right foot out and then you bring your left foot out, that's a step. Not quite the same in music. So we're going to call it a half step. 300 years ago they could have called it something else, but that's what they called it. That's what we're stuck with. But it's just nomenclature. So don't let yourself get hung up in the nomenclature of half step, whole step, sharps going up, flats going down. Those are just words to explain what's being done. And it's your job to kind of figure out how to play it on your particular instrument. And it's important when you're doing those naming the notes on the way up the keyboard is that you say them out loud. Don't keep it internal. Keep it external. Help. You know, it's like reading. If you read externally, if you read to other people, it's much different than if you're reading to yourself. Same's true of saying the scale. You want to say the scale as you're playing it. Now, as far as the cards, drop the cards on the floor. Mess them all up with your hands. Put them back in in an order, and then test yourself on the cards. So with the keyboards, you're going C, C sharp, D, D sharp, etc., all the way up the scale. With the cards, you just throw them on the floor, so there's no rhyme or reason to the notes. Makes it a little more challenging to know the name of the note, the fingering of the note, and what it looks like. But it's very important because it's a different way of learning it. You know, you can practice it on your instrument. That's good. You want to practice it on your instrument. But you also want to be able to do it without your instrument. Say, oh, well, that's an E and it's fingered this way, or whatever note it happens to be. And just one more thing about the half step. As you play each note on the piano, it's called a half step. Every note you play going up, if you play every single note, is a half step. All right, so just accept that. You will see a keyboard either underneath what I'm saying or taking the whole screen, so that as I talk to you, you can understand what I'm talking about with the keyboard. Everything, I'm going to play the chromatic scale for you, and I'm going to play 12 notes. Does that sound like it's finished? No. That's 12 notes. This is 13 notes. That sounds like it's finished, doesn't it? So all I did was I added the first note that I played at the end of the scale to finish it. So let's just review half steps for a moment. Any note that you play on the piano consecutively from one note to the next, not skipping notes, is a half step, whether you're going up or whether you're going down. Now, you can say the alphabet very quickly. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Okay, now, you want to be able to get to the point sometime as soon as you can, probably a year, 2, 3 years, maybe 50, that you can do the same thing. So start slow. Now I would assume that if you haven't played it before, you'd start even slower than that. Start with the first note and just play it and hold it as long as you can. Say the name of the note. Look at the note on a piece of paper if you can, and remember the fingering of the note, okay? And then stay there as long as you need to till you know that. And while you're playing that long tone, study your fingers, study your body, make sure it's relaxed. A drummer once told me that, I always thought that drummers hit the drum, but he called it a note. And that's the first time I ever heard a drum stroke called a note. It really changed my way of thinking. So everything you play is a note, and it's very important, whether it's a drum or a clarinet or a violin or a piano or whatever it is. If you apply yourself and you do it every day, my rule is practice 1 minute a day and then see how much you can add to that the next day and the next day, and so you're practicing a long time and not even remembering how long you practiced. Learning how to blow, learning how to sit, and there's a lot to think about. But this chromatic scale thing is probably the most important because it's going to help you with everything else, including your posture, because you start slow, including the ease of your fingers because you're getting faster, and you can't get faster without your fingers being round and normal, not like that. And it just really helps you do everything. I just want to say that music takes time. Music takes time. Take your time, however long this chromatic scale thing takes you, do it first every day, and you'll find that it really helps you. I know I'm being repetitive a lot here, but the point is that we need to be repetitive. Practicing is repetitive. That's how we learn, is by repeating. So just figure on a lifetime of practice. You need to learn how to practice, and your teacher's going to help you do that. And try and practice in the same place every day and at the same time every day if you can. And, make a little shrine for yourself. This is my music place. And you might have a computer there, you might have your keyboard there, well, you should have your keyboard there. You might have reed-making stuff there. You might have 4 trumpet mouthpieces you're trying there. You might have a new bow on the violin or the cello or the viola. It's just where everything you do that has to do with music is set up. I call it a shrine, but it's not. It's just a place where you do everything musically, okay? On the introductory section of this video, you heard a piece called The Flight of the Bumblebee. Now, The Flight of the Bumblebee is basically the chromatic scale on the melodic right hand, and it's kind of used as a little ersatz competition amongst musicians how fast they can play that. And, you know, it's like the minute waltz. Some guy said, well, I can play in 46 seconds, you know. Uh, musically, it doesn't mean that much, but what it does mean is that you've practiced and you've become limber with your fingers. So, you know, listen to that piece and listen to how it's played. If you go to YouTube, you can probably find 20 people that are playing it, and you're going to find a person that you love much more than the rest of them. And I won't tell you who the one I love is. Uh, First things first, memorize the look, the name, the fingering, and the sound of the first note you play. And do that with every note you play until all the notes feel as easy as the first one you learned. And you're really not thinking about it, you're just playing. Anytime you're thinking about it, you're getting in the way of the music, because your fingers have to know the notes, not your brain. Your brain is the learning mechanism. Your fingers are the retention mechanism. And once you have your fingers able to play the chromatic scale, or a flight of bumblebee, or a solo on your instrument, or an etude on your instrument, that's when you start taking the music off the page. And that's the goal of every professional musician, or every musician that wants to play as beautiful as possible, that you're not reading notes, that you're not owned by the notes or the rhythms. If you only learned one note a week, in 13 weeks, you'd know the chromatic scale. Known might not be the right word, but on the road to owning the chromatic scale. Or again, I'm going to be repetitive. Practice slow. Start slow. Stay slow for a long time. Feel very comfortable about what you're doing. It may seem daunting, and you're only going to do it for 15 to 30 minutes a day, and one day you're going to wake up and you're going to own it, and it's worth that little investment of 15 to 30 minutes a day to get it done. Notice that I start all exercises on the note C. And we know that instruments are in different keys, but still, if the instrument's in a different key, if it's an E flat alto, or a B flat clarinet, or a C violin, or whatever, always start your studies on the note C. And the reason is there's no flats and there's no sharps in the key of C. So if you learn something in the key of C and you add a flat, you're in the key of F. And then you learn it in the key of F. And the F has an altered B. It's a B flat. So that's the idea. You see how things are altered as you're learning them. You're not learning them in F sharp and trying to figure out what the altered note is. And that's knowing that you can start any scale or the chromatic scale on any note. Okay? But we still start our new scale on C so we can see the alteration. When we go to school, I don't know, first grade, second grade, probably even kindergarten, the alphabet, at least when I went to school, was above the blackboard. I guess now it's a whiteboard. You know, it's perfect handwriting, you know, like it's just exactly like it's supposed to be. None of us get very close to that, but we get to the point where we can tell what the letters are and read them and say them out loud, and that's the same thing we're doing in music. So if you can have a picture of your keyboard or your keyboard next to you all the time, you're constantly seeing this picture, like when you were a kid in school, and that was always above the blackboard. So if the teacher was up working on the blackboard, you might look up and say, oh, well, there's an L, you know, and that's kind of what you have to do with the chromatic scale also. I know I'm repetitive, but it's important that you have a private teacher. A band director is not going to be able to teach you, or orchestra director is not going to be able to teach you the chromatic scale with all the people, the kids they have to deal with and the different levels, and just getting the group in control, they're going to have a hard time teaching a bunch of different people on a bunch of different keyed instruments the chromatic scale. So have a private teacher, very important. If after 4 or 5 months you're not thrilled with your teacher, you can change teachers until you get somebody that you communicate with. But you have a responsibility, and I've said this in other videos, to work for the teacher and try and do what they say. Now, again, after 4 or 5 months, if you don't agree with it, and you do know the difference for some reason, you can change teachers. The older you get, the more a teacher is important, because you're getting into the more esoteric areas of music rather than just learning one note at a time. Another problem that a single note instrumentalists have is that on our chromatic scale, as we go over like 4 octaves or 3 octaves, some instruments, the saxophone only has about 2.5 octaves, I think, unless you want to get to the altissimo register. They can be different fingerings. On a piano, a C is a C is a C, and you're probably always going to hit that with your thumb. And from octave to octave, you're probably not going to change what finger you use on the chromatic scale unless it's necessary for the piece of music. But as a learning tool, a piano is probably going to play the same fingerings all the time. Now, a clarinet or saxophone, well, saxophone's 2.5 octaves. A clarinet has 4 octaves easily. Flutes have 1, 2, 3 octaves. And all the notes in the octaves are different fingerings. For example, the clarinet. Okay, 4 different fingerings. Okay, that makes it harder for us, but we're tough. So you're going to see a diagram of this 5-note exercise that I like to do. And the exercise does 2 things. It helps you learn the notes, and it helps you improve your tone and your blowing and your holding of the instrument. So it's 5 notes, and again you're going to see a display of that on the screen, and you can breathe after the top note or after the bottom note, and you start very, very slow. And I'm gonna play this faster than you're gonna start because we have time issues. Now you probably want to spend as much time on the first note as I did in that whole exercise until you learn that note. Once you learn the note, you can play the next note. I'm going to start on C. That wasn't the note that I suggested, so I'm going to start on C now. And I'm just going to work on the first 2 notes. And I'm going to say to myself the name of the note, think of the fingering of the note, and the way it looks. All right, so C. Then when I get C and I feel pretty good about C, I'm going to hit or D flat. I'm going to work on that till I can get it a little faster. Then you're going to add the next note. And again, the new note, which for us is D, should be a very, very long tone, so you can study it and you can study how your fingers feel. And then pretty soon, after a few weeks, you're going to find that you're going to be able to play the 5 notes. Then you stop and you play a long tone. And on the long tone, you're going to study your tone, where you're blowing, where there's tension in your body. If you have a reed, which my reed's pretty crummy today, you know, that you have the best reed you can have. And, you know, you're going to get that so that you can play it 3 times without stopping, and then the long tone. Now, you can play it more than 3 times, but 3 times is the minimum, and every time you play it more than 3 times, it's going to get harder. So if you play it 10 times, it's going to get harder. And what you're going to find is, well, first let's do the C a little faster. It's 3 times and then a long tone. Okay, now, for beginners, it's going to be so you get your 3 times in going that slow, and then you get it to where it's going faster. Once you get it pretty fast, and I would suggest that you stay on C for a long time till you're feeling really good with it. Once you get it kind of fast, you can go to the next note, starting on C sharp. Okay, and you gradually just go up in half steps all the way up the scale. And that's how you learn that. It's simple, but it's time consuming. And the thing is if you have trouble with time consuming, you're going to have trouble with music, because music is time consuming. But, you know, look at it that when else are you going to get a time in the whole day to be by yourself, to be quiet, to be thinking about something that you enjoy, and getting better at something that you enjoy, and letting all the problems of the day pass away. You know, you had a fight with your little brother, or, you know, you don't like the school teacher, or, you know, mom told you that you had to do this, or dad told you you had to do that. And this is your time to be alone. And you have to declare the time and tell everybody, you know, 5 to 6 every day is my time, or 5 to midnight, or whatever. That's a long practice. However long you're going to practice, you know, let them know that you're going to be involved with something for a while, and they'll get used to it. You know, and if somebody disturbs you in the middle of it, say, well, you know, I'm practicing. I'll do it as soon as I get done practicing. So the chromatic scale is also, once you start learning it, is a good warm-up for everything that you do afterwards in your practice, your etudes and your repertoire. And I've been playing this as a warm-up for, you know, like I say, 50 or 60 years, not sure which. I could figure it out, I guess. But it really gets you ready to go on to the next thing. I use it a lot of times to try reeds, which again, I should probably be doing that right now. The other thing it teaches you is to start slow and to get faster. Now, whether you're playing an etude or the repertoire, that's how you're going to learn. Generally, what we do on etudes or repertoire is we start at the beginning, play the whole thing, see where we're having troubles, and then go to the places that are troublesome and start very, very, very slow so we can play them. And if you have one of those little places that's so difficult, you got to memorize it. You know, which you're probably going to be, if you're playing it that many times anyway, you're probably memorizing as you go along. But it's important if something's extremely difficult that you memorize it to play it. So I want to repeat it one more time. We start slow and we get faster so that the notes are in our fingers and not in our brain. We don't want to be thinking about the note, whether it's going to come out, what's the next note. Boy, I see that note 4 lines away coming, and it's hard, and I'm hoping I'm not going to miss it. And you got this whole internal dialogue going. You don't know the piece of music if that's what you're thinking. Okay, you kind of know it, but you don't really know it. You don't own it. And what we want to do always is own our music, including the chromatic scale, especially the chromatic scale, because it's the basis of everything we play. Okay, so we did the 5-note exercise, and we used the little saying, start slow, stay slow until you know. The other thing you want to think about is using a metronome, because what happens is if you don't use a metronome, it's what I call tempo crawl. You start, without even knowing it, you start saying, oh, well, I think I could do it a little faster, and you push yourself, and then you goof, and then you got to slow down again. And so if you start with the metronome, a really important part of what we use as tools to help us, and you get the chromatic scale or the chromatic exercise, or both, at a certain tempo. Let's say it's, just make a number up, 76. And you feel like it's really as good as you can get it. Then you turn the metronome up to 78 or 80, whatever the next click is. And you do that till you get it pretty fast. But you have to stay with the metronome, and you have to listen to the metronome. You know, it's okay to turn the metronome on. Well, I should say it's not okay to turn the metronome on and just have it on while you're playing. Try and stay with it, okay? Time is very important in music because you're playing with other people. So if you can't play a consistent time, then everybody's going to have trouble playing with you. If they can't play consistent time, you're going to have trouble playing with them. So it's very important to use a metronome as much as you can. Okay. As you know a piece, you can let the metronome go and just let it come from your heart, but that takes a while. It takes a while, but you'll get it. And the other thing I wanted to say about the chromatic 5-note exercise is that some of them are pretty easy, and some of them are pretty difficult. So it's important that you play the easy ones faster, and the slower, and the more difficult ones slower. Okay, because you're training yourself. You're not trying to win a race. Okay, so start slow if it's harder, and just take your time, and you get it to the speed of the other one, and the evenness of the other one, and the evenness is very important. So before we quit, just a couple of things about the chromatic scale before we end this talk. First, what is an enharmonic, E-N-H-A-R-M-O-N-I-C note? Enharmonic. It's a note that has 2 names, but it's fingered the same and it sounds the same. So we have C and we have D. Now we're looking at the piano keyboard. In between those 2 notes, there's a black note. It has 2 names. So if you're going up C to C sharp on the black key, and then C sharp or D flat back down to the C. Okay? If you're coming from D and you're going down to that black note in between C and D, it's a D flat. So basically, as we go up, we think sharps, and as we come down, we think flats. That's not true of major scales or minor scales or other kinds of scales that are altered both directions. Okay, we talked about the F major scale earlier. simply adding a flat, and the flat is B flat both directions. It's not A sharp, okay? So don't think of your scales the same way you think of the chromatic exercise or the chromatic scale. So now it's been a few months or a year and a month and a day that you've been practicing the chromatic exercise, the 5-note exercise. What you're going to learn when you come back to this video a while later is a 6-note chromatic exercise that just happens to be the flight of the bumblebee. So it's not the whole flight of the bumblebee, but it's the basic premise of the piece. And ultimately, that means you'll be able to play the flight of the bumblebee, at least the start of it, in any key. So you'll notice, and again, there's going to be a display of this underneath my picture, or completely taking the screen. But it's a 5-note chromatic exercise starting on the 5th note. But when you go back up, you play a 6th note. So it's this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? Alright, so there's your chromatic exercise as a flight of the bumblebee. It's harder, and that's why we wait till a little later to do it. And again, you start very, very slow, and you increase the speed, and then you have the beginning of the flight of the bumblebee. So after your practice of the chromatic exercise and the chromatic scale, you're going to go to your etudes. Practice them exactly like you practice a chromatic exercise or scale. Start slow, get gradually faster, okay? Play it all the way through. Note where you're having trouble. Go back and concentrate on each place you're having trouble, and then play the whole thing again. In the long run, the chromatic scale will be more responsible for your quicker improvement, but slower practice than anything. A general reminder, practice every day, hopefully the same place, same time. Routines are everything. Let me say that again. Routines are everything. If you don't practice most every day, you don't have a routine. So develop routines for everything you do. Makes life easier. You know what the routine looks like, you know what to do during the routine, and you just do it. So, I hope that helped you. The chromatic scale is not terribly difficult if you put your mind to it. And I want to remind you, until next time, be happy with where you're at right now while you're trying to get to where you want to be. Because we're always trying to get better. So it's always better to be happy while we're trying to get better. Like yourself. It's important. Have a great day.